My wife used to say I had a gift for patience. She'd watch me untangle a fishing line that anybody else would have cut and thrown away, and she'd shake her head and smile. "You're the only man I know," she'd say, "who actually believes things can be fixed." She passed 8 years ago, and I think about that a lot now. About patience, about what it costs you and what it eventually pays back. Her name was June, not the June on any list of names I've made up. My real wife, the woman who raised our daughter with me in a split-level house outside of Columbus, Ohio, who clipped grocery coupons on Sunday mornings and sang off-key to the radio, and never once complained about the fact that we weren't rich. We were comfortable. That was the word we used. We had enough, and we were grateful for it. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I didn't get wealthy doing it, but I built something real, a pension, a paid-off house, a savings account that I treated like it was made of glass. June and I decided early that we'd live below our means so that someday, when it mattered, we'd have something to give. We didn't spend money to impress people. We spent it where it counted. Our daughter, I'll call her my daughter, because that's what she is, the whole of her. Her name is Brooke. She was the kind of kid who made everything feel possible. Smart, funny, stubborn in the good way. She got a scholarship to Ohio State, graduated with honors, went straight into a nonprofit fundraising. I was proud of her in a way I couldn't always find the words for. Still am, underneath everything. That matters, I think, even now. She met him at a work conference in Chicago. His name is Preston. No, wait. His name is Theo. No, I need to be careful here. His name is Weston Farr. He came from a family that had money the way some families have weather. Constant, taken for granted, invisible to them, but very visible to everyone else. His father ran a regional chain of car dealerships in western Pennsylvania. His mother sat on charity boards and referred to herself in the third person at parties. I know this because Brooke told me, laughing, when she first started dating him. She thought it was funny then. I met Weston for the first time at a restaurant in Columbus, about 4 months after Brooke told me she was seeing someone. He wore a sport coat on a Tuesday. He shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. He spent most of dinner talking about his own career. He was in investment portfolio development, which as far as I could tell meant he moved other people's money around and took a percentage. And when he did ask me a question, it was, "So what kind of engineering?" in a tone that suggested the answer wouldn't interest him. It didn't. But Brooke looked happy. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She looked genuinely happy, sitting across from him, laughing at things he said, touching his arm when she made a point. And because I loved her more than I distrusted him, I kept my mouth shut and gave him the benefit of the doubt. That was my first mistake. Over the next 2 years, things shifted in ways that were hard to name in the moment but easy to see in retrospect. Brooke started canceling plans with me more often. Phone calls got shorter. When we did talk, she seemed distracted, like part of her was always in another room. I told myself it was normal. She was building a life with someone. That's what children do. That's what you want for them. Then Weston proposed, and things accelerated. The engagement party was at his parents' estate in Swickley, Pennsylvania. I drove 4 hours to get there. I wore my good suit, the charcoal one I'd bought for June's funeral, and worn twice since. I brought a card with a check inside. $2,000, which was meaningful to me, even if it wasn't to them. Weston's mother, whose name was Vivian, and who looked like she'd been preserved in approval, shook my hand in the foyer and said, "Oh, you must be Brooke's father. How lovely that you made the trip. How lovely that you made the trip." To my own daughter's engagement party. I smiled. I had June's patience. I took a glass of wine I didn't want and found a corner where I could watch my daughter be happy, and I told myself that's what fathers do. We step back. We hold the wall. We let our kids have their moment. What I didn't know yet was that my moment was coming, and it wasn't going to look anything like what I expected. 3 months before the wedding, Brooke called me on a Thursday evening. She sounded bright, organized, purposeful. The way she sounds when she's about to ask for something and has already prepared for your objections. She told me the wedding venue had been selected, a historic estate in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. She told me the photographer was booked, someone whose name I didn't recognize, but whose Instagram had apparently been featured in a bridal magazine. She told me there would be a live band, a florist whose centerpieces were statement pieces, a videographer with a drone, and a caterer who specialized in elevated farm-to-table cuisine. Then she told me the total cost, $164,000. I sat down. Not dramatically, I was already sitting, but I felt the chair differently. And the plan, she said, in that same bright, organized voice, is for the costs to be split. Weston's parents are contributing $70,000, and we're hoping you can cover the rest. I did the math without a calculator. The rest was $94,000. I want to be precise about this because precision matters. I had worked for 31 years. I had scrimped and saved and driven used cars and taken vacations to places within driving distance. The money I had set aside, the money I had protected like it was made of glass, was real, and it was finite, and $94,000 was a very large piece of it. I asked the question any reasonable person would ask. What about you and Weston? What are the two of you contributing? There was a pause. Dad, we're just starting out. Weston's transitioning between firms right now, and I've been putting everything into the new campaign at work. We don't really have liquid assets at the moment. Liquid assets. My 27-year-old daughter, using the phrase liquid assets to explain why she wasn't contributing to her own wedding. I said I needed to think about it. She said she understood. We hung up. I sat in my living room for a long time after that call. The house was quiet the way it gets quiet when you're the only one in it. I looked at a photograph of Brooke on the mantel. She's maybe 10 years old in it, standing at the edge of Lake Erie with her arms thrown wide, squinting into the sun, laughing at something I'd said. I don't remember what I said. I remember she laughed. I thought about what June would have told me. She would have been practical first, emotional second. That was her order of operations. She would have said, "Don't make a decision when you're hurt. Find out what's actually going on." So I did. I called my brother-in-law, a retired family law attorney in Cincinnati, and I described the situation. He listened without interrupting, which is a skill most people don't have. When I finished, he said, "Has she said anything about what happens if you can't contribute that amount?" I said she hadn't. He said, "Ask." So I called Brooke back the next day. I told her I'd been thinking it over, that I wanted to support her, that I loved her. All of that was true. And then I asked, "What happens if I can't cover the full amount?" The brightness left her voice like a light switch. She said, Weston's parents had made their contribution contingent on the total budget being met. If the full amount wasn't secured, the venue would have to be changed, the vendors renegotiated, the whole plan restructured. She said it in a way that made clear that restructuring the plan was not something she was willing to consider. I said gently, that I thought perhaps a wedding with a smaller budget was still a wedding. She said, less gently, that I didn't understand what this meant to her, and that she'd hoped I would want to give her this. I want to pause here, because I know how this sounds. I know there are people reading this who think I should have just paid. He's her father. She's his only child. What's money for if not this? I understand that argument. I held it in my hand and turned it over for several days. But here's the thing. I had never, not once, been consulted about this wedding. I had not been invited to tour venues or taste food or look at flower arrangements. I had not been asked my opinion on the date or the guest count or the location. I had been handed a number and pointed toward a dotted line, and the assumption, the bedrock assumption, was that I would sign. And somewhere underneath all of that was a question I couldn't stop asking myself. When had my daughter become someone who handed her father a bill? I told her I needed more time. She said she didn't have more time. The deposits were due. I said I would let her know by the end of the week. What happened next is the part I'm not proud of, and also the part I'm most at peace with. I spent 2 days doing something never done before. I got organized. I pulled out a legal pad. I'm old enough that legal pads are still my first instinct, and I started writing things down. Not feelings, facts, dates, conversations, patterns, the canceled dinners, the shortened calls, the engagement party where I was a pleasant inconvenience, the phone call where $94,000 was presented to me the way you present a parking ticket. And then I wrote down something else. A question my brother-in-law had asked me, almost as an aside, near the end of our conversation. Does Weston work? Like actually work? Because transitioning between firms can mean a lot of things. I looked into it. Not invasively, I'm not a man who hires investigators or goes through people's things. But I had a colleague from my county days who knew people in financial services, and I made a phone call, and I asked some careful questions. What I found was not illegal, nothing like that, but it was clarifying. Weston had left his last position, not transitioned left, 18 months ago. He had started a small private equity venture with 2 partners. The venture had not yet turned a profit. He was, in the financial sense, operating almost entirely on family support. His parents' $70,000 contribution to the wedding was not a gift. It was, according to what I was told, contingent on Weston's father being given primary placement in the wedding program and naming rights to the honeymoon suite reservation. I'm not making that up. Naming rights to a hotel suite and the honeymoon. I hadn't even known about the honeymoon yet. Brooke mentioned it, almost en passing, in our next call. They were planning 2 weeks in Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast. She mentioned the hotels the way you mention things you've already decided, not things you're discussing. I did the rough math. The honeymoon was another 20-something thousand on top of the wedding. I want to be very clear. I was never asked about the honeymoon. But I understood from the architecture of the conversation that the expectation was that I was paying for it too. I made my decision on a Saturday morning. I drove to the diner where Brooke and I used to have breakfast when she was in high school. A place called Ronnie's, still there, same booths, same coffee, same kind of daylight that makes everything look like it happened a long time ago. I got there early and I ordered coffee, and I sat in our old booth and I thought about my wife. June would not have written a check. I know that with certainty. Not because she was hard, but because she was clear. She had a way of seeing through the performance of things to the structure underneath, and she would have seen this structure and known exactly what it was. It wasn't a wedding. It was a transfer. It was the assumption, formalized with deposits and vendor contracts, that a father's savings existed to be converted into someone else's vision without consultation, without gratitude, and apparently without his presence, because somewhere in all of this I had also understood that my role at the actual wedding had been quietly minimized to the point of near invisibility. I was not walking my daughter down the aisle. Weston's family had a processional tradition that didn't include it. I was seated with the general guests. I had been assigned a table at the reception that I can only describe as the outer orbit, so I made some calls. Not to Brooke. Not yet. I called the venue coordinator first. I explained who I was, the father of the bride, one of the primary funding sources, and I asked some questions about the deposit structure and the payment timeline. The coordinator was professional and helpful. She told me that the venue deposit, which was substantial, had been placed on a card that I now understood was connected to an account my brother-in-law had helped me look at more carefully. The account was joint, mine and Brooke's, set up years ago when she was in college for emergency purposes. I called my bank. I made an appointment. I want to be honest about what I felt doing all of this. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something quieter and more complicated. The feeling you get when you finally stopped pretending something is okay and started dealing with what it actually is. I met with the vendor coordinator at the Finger Lakes estate 3 weeks before the wedding. I drove up on a Wednesday, which was the kind of thing I could do because I was retired. I sat in a beautiful room with exposed beams and a view of the vineyard, and I explained my situation clearly and without drama. I told her that I was the father of the bride, that I had been presented with a financial obligation that I had not agreed to, and that I needed to understand exactly which deposits had been placed, and in what amounts and from what sources. She brought in her event manager. They were both very polite, in the way that people are polite when they realize something complicated is happening. I spent 2 hours in that room. I had my legal pad. I had photocopies of account statements my brother-in-law had helped me pull together. I had a very specific list of questions. By the end of the meeting, I had a very specific picture. $31,000 in deposits had been placed using funds from the joint account, funds that were substantially mine. The remaining deposits from Weston's family had conditions attached to them that the venue was not comfortable discussing. The total vendor commitment outstanding, the amount still owed to the florist, the photographer, the caterer, the band, and the videographer, was just over $80,000. None of it had my signature on it. I drove home and I called Brooke. I told her I loved her. I told her I wanted her to be happy. I told her those things first, and I meant them. and I needed her to know that they were the foundation of everything else I was about to say. Then I told her I wasn't paying. Not nothing, I wasn't abandoning her. I told her I would give her what I had originally, genuinely intended to give as a wedding gift, when I thought a wedding was something that would include me. $15,000, freely given, no strings, hers to do with as she chose. But I was not funding a $164,000 event I had not been consulted on, for a wedding where I had been seated with the general guests, in honor of a marriage to a man who I had significant concerns about, and who was not, at this particular moment in his life, contributing a single dollar to this undertaking. Brooke went quiet. Then she said, in a voice I hadn't heard from her since she was a teenager, and I told her she couldn't go to a concert on a school night. "You're ruining everything," I said, quietly. "I don't think I'm the one who did that. What happened after that happened fast, and I'll try to tell it in the order it occurred." Brooke called me the next morning and told me that if I didn't honor my commitment, her word, though I had never made one, the wedding could not proceed as planned. The venue required full payment 60 days out. The vendors had payment schedules. The whole structure depended on money that now was not going to arrive. Weston called me an hour after that. It was the first time he'd ever called me directly. He was not wearing a sport coat, metaphorically speaking. He told me I was putting my daughter in an impossible position. He told me that his parents had planned their contribution around mine. He told me that the right thing to do, as a father, was to support my daughter's happiness. I asked him what he was contributing. He said that wasn't the point. I said respectfully that I thought it was exactly the point. Then Vivienne called, his mother. I have to give her credit. She was composed in a way that Weston wasn't. She told me she understood my concerns. She really did. But perhaps I didn't fully appreciate how important this wedding was to Brooke and how much work had gone into planning it. She used the phrase, "the memories she deserves." I told her that I agreed with her completely. Brooke deserved wonderful memories. I also told her that in my experience, memories worth having didn't require a person to spend money they hadn't committed to spending on an event they hadn't been consulted on. She told me I was being difficult. I told her I had enjoyed speaking with her and wished her a good afternoon. 2 days later, Brooke came to my house. She sat in the living room, the same room where I'd looked at her photograph after that first phone call, and she cried, real tears, not performative ones, and I sat across from her, and I didn't pretend it didn't hurt, because it did. It hurt more than I knew how to say. She told me she felt like I was choosing to make a point over choosing to love her. I told her I had been making a choice to love her for 63 years, and that loving her didn't mean accepting every version of how she wanted to be loved in return. She said, "All I wanted was a beautiful wedding." I said, "Then let's talk about what kind of wedding we can actually plan together." For the first time in the entire conversation, not just that day, but in months of conversations, she went quiet in a way that wasn't angry. Just quiet, like something had shifted slightly. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon. Not about money, mostly. About her and Weston, about what she actually wanted from her life, about the version of herself she'd been performing since the engagement, and whether that was a version she recognized. She cried more. I didn't give her easy answers, because I love her too much for that. She didn't call off the wedding. I want to be clear about that. She and Weston got married 6 weeks later, at the county courthouse in Columbus, with a dinner afterward at a restaurant they both loved. A farm-to-table place in the short north, nice but not extravagant, that sat 20 people. I was there. I walked her in. I sat next to her at dinner, and I gave a toast that made her cry the good kind. Weston's parents were not there. They declined to attend a courthouse wedding. That was their choice, and it told me everything I needed to know that I hadn't already figured out. 3 months after the wedding, Brooke called me on a Thursday evening. She sounded like herself, the real version, the one I'd been missing for a couple of years. She told me that she and Weston were in couples counseling. She told me she'd started questioning some of the decisions she'd made over the past 2 years, the ways she'd let herself be slowly shaped into someone who handed her father a bill. She didn't say it exactly like that, but that was the shape of what she said. She said, "I think I owe you an apology." I told her she owed me nothing except the phone call, and the phone call was already more than enough. She told me she loved me. I told her I loved her back, and that I always had, and that I always would, and that none of the rest of it had ever changed that, not for a single day. After we hung up, I sat in my living room for a while. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been before. Less like absence, more like rest. I looked at that photograph on the mantel. Brooke at the edge of Lake Erie, arms wide, laughing. I thought about what June would have said. She probably would have said something like, "Took long enough." And then she would have smiled, the way she used to smile when she was right about something, and wanted me to know it without quite saying so. I still have the legal pad with all my notes. I've thought about throwing it away, but I haven't yet. Maybe I'm keeping it as a reminder, not of the conflict, but of the clarity, of the fact that patience isn't the same as passivity, that waiting for the right moment to tell the truth isn't weakness. It's the only way the truth actually lands. My wife was right about a lot of things. She was right that I believe things can be fixed, and she was right that that's a gift, though some days it costs more than it looks like it should. But some things, if you're patient enough, do get fixed. Not perfectly, not all the way back to what they were, but into something real and honest and yours, and some days that's exactly enough.